Okay, Chair, we're now live on YouTube. When you're ready, over to you.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So good afternoon and welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual Strategic Planning Committee on the 27th of April 2021. I'm your chair, Councillor Dan Ledger. I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded, so please bear this in mind throughout and be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting, and we reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this strategic planning meeting is dependent on an internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are unable to reconnect, we'll consider this meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all phones are turned off or are on silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you're not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Please do not interrupt during the meeting, keep your points short, and try not to repeat any points that have already been made. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any member of the public who wishes to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website at www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We are now going to start the meeting by doing a roll call of all committee members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone? When you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you've confirmed you're present, please mute your microphone again. Over to you, Wendy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chair, I'll start with you. So Councillor Ledger.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Davies.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howe.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham. Councillor Moulding's going to be late to the meeting, so I'll move on to Councillor Pratt.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Skinner.
Sends his apologies.
Lovely. Thank you. And Councillor Thomas.
Present. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. I can confirm we're quorate this afternoon. So back to you, Chair.
Very much, Wendy. So we'll move to agenda item 1, which is public speaking. Wendy, we don't have any members of the public wishing to speak, do we?
No, we don't.
Thank you very much. So we'll move to agenda item 2, which are minutes of the previous meeting. So if anyone has any comments on the set of minutes for the 30th of March 2021, please do so by raising your electronic blue hand. If no hands are raised, I'll take this as an indication that you've all agreed to the previous minutes. So those I can take as agreed. Move to agenda item 3, which are apologies. Wendy, can you just confirm the apologies that we've received, please?
Just 2 apologies from Councillor Allen and Councillor Bailey.
And the apology from Councillor Skinner as well.
Oh, apologies, Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. So if those are all accepted, we'll move to agenda item 4, which is declarations of interest. This will be done via a roll call, and it's over to you again, Wendy.
Thank you. So I'll start with you again, Chair.
None.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Davies.
I'm an Exmouth Town Councillor, which is obviously relevant to the local plan. And also on page 67, there's a list of respondents to the scoping, and 2 of the individual respondents are known to me, and I'm also a member of Transition Exmouth, which is listed on that page.
Okay, so are we referring to item 9?
It's page 67.
Is that the scoping and vision report?
I think it's the sustainability appraisal scoping consultation.
Oh, item 8.
Item 8. Item
Okay.
8, yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Sorry, if members, when you declare interest, if you could just tell me the agenda items, so it just makes it easier for me to record the declaration, whether it's personal or prejudicial, and the interest you're actually declaring. That would be really helpful. Thank you. So I'll move on to Councillor Arnott.
Yes, I'll just declare a personal interest as a Collerton Parish Councillor, and that might be relevant to items 7 through 10, or it may not even 11, but just that's the best I can do, I'm afraid. I'm seeing Shirley smiling.
Lovely.
I'm trying to just build braces, basically. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Similarly, items 7 to 10, personal interest as Cranbrook Town Council member.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, I'm a Broadcliffe Parish Councillor as well, a resident of Broadcliffe Station. That's relevant for obviously items 7, similar to the others, 7 through to 10, but also item number 12, because that is proposed to come through an area where I live and also where I'm also a parish councillor.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. May I declare an interest in items 7 and I believe it will be 10 as well, in view of my employed role as a clerk to All Saints Parish Council, Chardstock Parish Council, and Newton Poppleford and Hertford Parish Council, all of whom are consultees to the local plan. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Councillor Howe.
Yeah, personal interest on 7 to 12, Bishopscliff Parish Councillor, and obviously I own a business in my local village.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Councillor Pratt, you're muted.
Sorry, no interest to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, so Parish Councillor for Broadcliffe, which is in the so-called West End of East Devon, and I think that's probably every item from 7 to 10, but also item 12, because Broadcliffe is quite substantially within that, the Cliff Valley Regional Park. Personal interest in item 8, because one of the respondents is known to me. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Rylance, I missed the start of the West End declaration, whether it was your connection or my connection, but I couldn't quite hear what you said.
So as a parish councillor and resident of Broadcliffe, which is the West End of East Devon, I feel that items 7 to 10 are probably relevant
7 to 10.
for a personal
lovely.
interest. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Thomas.
None, thank you, Wendy.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Wendy. Agenda item 5 are matters of urgency. I can confirm that there are no matters of urgency to discuss. Agenda item 6, confidential and exempt items. Again, I can confirm there's no confidential or exempt items. Agenda item 7 is initial feedback report, local plans, issues and options consultation. And it is over to Ed Freeman as we start our little double act for the day, going back and forth. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Chair, and afternoon, members. Yes, so this report is an initial feedback report on the issues and options consultation that members will recall ran from the 18th of January this year to the 15th of March. It's initial feedback only primarily on sort of the multiple choice questions that were asked in the form of a survey, because obviously they're relatively quick to analyse and summarise for you. We're still working through the detailed feedback in terms of the written comments that we received and hope to report those in a more detailed feedback report at your meeting in June. But hopefully this report gives some initial analysis of the comments that have been received from the 658 responses that we received. So they're summarised in Appendix 1 to the report. A few things I would just pick up on in terms of those comments and that feedback is clearly there's not a lot of consensus in terms of a number of areas within the consultation, with quite a split in terms of the responses. But what you can see, I think, is in some areas there is clear consensus, certainly in terms of the objectives for the plan that we stated. Nearly 2/3 of respondents were supportive of those objectives for the plan. In terms of the scope of the plan, it's fairly evenly split between single plan option and the multiple plans option, but no doubt we'll come on to that at a later in the agenda when there's a specific report on that issue. I've noted that sort of energy efficiency measures seems to be an area where there's wide support and consensus. So there's much support for requiring net zero carbon development through this plan, either from adoption or later in the plan period. And 60% of respondents supported the idea of identifying land specifically for renewables development, like solar farms in the district through the plan. In terms of the housing questions, things were really quite split between the respondents, and so I think we need to do that further analysis on that area. Although there was quite a clear consensus for encouraging or requiring housing for all stages of life through the plan, so quite clear support for that as an objective. In terms of the economy, again, views quite split on a lot of the questions here. There was clear support, I think, for more home working, but it's fairly balanced between other locations for jobs to be located, and fairly strong support for jobs growth across all of the sectors that were named in the questions that were asked. Again, there's good support for a range of town centre uses coming forward, particularly more community and leisure uses, and a mix of commercial uses in town centres, seemingly indicating an understanding of the decline of retail uses and need for diversification of town centres. And I think other areas where there was clear consensus was around the importance of design. Many respondents noting the importance of good design, as well as the importance of protecting our built heritage and the countryside and the natural environment. But in other areas such as transport, access to services, the settlement hierarchy, housing distribution, comments were very split between the various options, and so we need to do some further analysis, look at the written comments that we received in relation to those areas, and come back with a more detailed analysis at your next meeting of those areas. But as I say, hopefully in the meantime this report provides some useful initial feedback in response to the consultation, and in terms of the recommendations, members are asked to note that initial feedback at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Ed. Just to reiterate what Ed's just said, it is just to note this, we are going to be covering a lot of the scoping and the vision in agenda item 8. So can we just focus on the initial feedback report in any questions that we might ask across this item? So we'll move to non-members first. So if any non-member wishes to speak, can you raise your hand now? No takers. So we'll move into committee, and Councillor Eleanor Ryan, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Ed. I must have been quite fast work really to pull all this together. I just wanted to say that I found it very interesting to see what the proportion of people who support more home working, and I suspect that we're starting to see in that statistic signs of patterns of change in the employment market because of COVID. And I think it's incredibly useful to have done this to be doing this process at this time, at a time when everything seems to be changing. And I do think that going forwards, we need to be tackling people's desire to work more from home through the planning system. It's absolutely crucial. So I was really comforted to see that people are wanting to work more from home, because it addresses a number of other aims that we have, namely addressing climate change. So the more people stay at home, the less people travel, the fewer emissions there are, etc., the less carbon dioxide is emitted. So I think it's incredibly crucial to be doing this work at this point when everything's in flux, and we have a real chance of being able to help people achieve their dreams in terms of how they work and how they live their lives. So hopefully, the more detailed, the more granular information we get from the report will provide even more information going forwards. But I just wanted to highlight that was quite stark. 70% of the respondents wanted more work from home options. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ryan. It's Councillor Howe, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to pick up on question 8 on page 25, well, no, 13, sorry. 13 and 25, depending on which way you read it. Yeah, I mean, just my analysis very quickly, but we've got 40% who think we probably got too much housing we're planning for, or, well, who just didn't want to answer. But that leaves 60% think we need to do, well, either exactly what we've already planned or more, which is a quite astounding statistic when you consider the age range of people that filled in this survey, mostly older people, 56 to 70 and 70 plus being the majority. So I just find the answer perplexing. I'm not entirely unhappy with it, but it's how we equate that in real life. But I look forward to Ed's further analysis, because there's quite some interesting questions and whatever posed by these rudimentary results, Ed. I get that, but thank you for doing them. But I look forward to your further analysis.
I think it's the way that question is written, Councillor Howe, as well. It's the fact that it says we need almost double the number of affordable homes, and if we build more homes, we'll get more affordables, and that's what I think has enticed a lot of respondents to say go more and go higher. Councillor.
Yeah, I get that. Don't worry, me, Dad. I did read it, Chair.
Councillor Thomas, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, acknowledging that Ed's highlighted these are preliminary conclusions, I'd like to take a step even further back and go to page 6 and 7, which looks at the background information specifically on those making submissions. Because this again should severely limit the significance of any conclusions we draw statistically from any of the results from any of the questions, frankly. Because if you look at that, just a simple graph on 7.3 on age range, which Councillor Howe has already highlighted, 56 through to 70 plus, which I assume a fair proportion of those are possibly even 80 plus, 2/3 basically of the respondents actually as old as or older than me, which I think is quite an achievement, really. But joking apart, we really should take a very big step back and compare this demographic with the demographic of the people in East Devon that we're looking to provide the appropriate homes for. And I think the first conclusion that we should draw, which doesn't actually feature anywhere in here, is that we actually can't be sure that we've got to a representative sample of the population that we're seeking to home in terms of looking at their housing requirements. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Davies, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Ed, there's a couple of questions for you. Looking back at the survey now, are there any questions you wish you'd asked? And also, as Councillor Thomas and others have highlighted, we may not have a representative sample here, although actually given the demographic in East Devon, I'm not sure that 56 to 70 is that unrepresentative. And also, I think that's reflective of the kind of people who perhaps have the time and the interest to get involved. But I wanted to ask Ed how and when we can get more detail in our consultations on what people really think about the options available to them.
Do you think you can cover Councillor Davies' points there, and then have any comments from any of the other speakers?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Any questions I wish we'd asked? At this point, no, I don't think there are. I think we covered the full range of issues. I think inevitably with these things, somewhere down the road, we'll probably think, damn, we wish we'd asked that, as the foundation to something that might come up later in plan production. But there's nothing that immediately occurs to me. I suppose given some of the responses, it begs the question where they're particularly split as to whether or not the options in hindsight perhaps should have been different to elicit a more clearer response for analysis. No, I don't think there's any specific questions. I mean, I think in terms of the next stage is about when we get to the draft plan stage and we have specific proposals in terms of potential site options for allocation or policies. Would be the time when people can probably engage with this a bit more. I think it's all quite high level and ethereal at this sort of stage, and people struggle to engage with that, which is perhaps part of the reason why the demographics in terms of the response rate are as they are, because perhaps it's the older generation that have more of the time to read through and reflect on the document and respond to it in the way they have. Certainly, I think in terms of the demographics and the age range, we need to try and do more to engage with the younger population in the district in future consultations. And I've already had a discussion with the comms team about how we can do that. We did try and do a lot through this consultation on social media to try and engage with younger people, and hopefully you can see that in the comms strategy, which is appended to the report. We posted quite a lot on social media, and I think we got quite a good hit rate. It just didn't translate into the responses through the consultation, those people then responding actually into the consultation questionnaire. So somehow we need to get a better pickup rate from those tweets and social media posts into actual responses to the consultation. So already working on that with the comms team with a view to a comms strategy for when we get to the draft plan stage, sort of early next year, hopefully. And I think in any event, that will be a stage which will be more engaging because there'll be specific proposals in there that people can see how that relates specifically to them and their lives, whereas this is quite high level at this stage, as I say. So having said that, I think the response rate is actually pretty good. It's better than the response rate we got at this stage of the last local plan, and significantly better than the response rate we got to the consultation we did on the Greater Exeter strategic plan at this stage. So I'm not unhappy with the response rate, but certainly the age range could be better in terms of engaging more with younger people, and we can work on that in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. Councillor Thomas, you want to come for a second bite of the cherry?
Just briefly, Chair, comment on something that Mr. Freeman's just said in relation to reaching different elements of the demography, particularly younger people. I think one of the things that comes across in a public sector consultation is it's a bit heavy. If you look at it in terms of its volume and its scope and its language and its presentation, it's actually very heavy and quite daunting. Now, there's no getting away from the fact that gratification is rather more instant than perhaps it was for the 60 and 75-year-olds when they were younger, or when we were younger. So when we're looking at designing consultation, can we perhaps split the consultation down into the individual questions? And for example, not necessarily seek responses to all questions from respondents, but actually in itself allow respondents to select which individual questions they feel are appropriate to respond to. I think that might help if you're talking about using social media to actually attract responses. Interested in other people's views on that.
Thanks very much, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Howe coming back in.
Well, I was just going to actually agree totally with what Councillor Thomas just said. When I was speaking to my residents and parish councils and everything else, they did find this consultation very heavy. they couldn't really answer the questions, or we didn't give them the choice of answers they wanted for the questions we posed as well, which was a frequent thing. So I do think, you know, we need to be better going forward, and we need to be very aware, as Councillor Thomas again pointed out, that the actual reports we're looking at do use the correct demographics for our population. You know, I do struggle to believe a report that, you know, doesn't reflect the youngsters, because they're just not enfranchised to answer. We need their answers, and we need to take heed of their answers. So I do fully support Councillor Thomas's proposal and idea on the way forward, and we need to be a lot more imaginative going forward as well. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howe. Councillor Thomas, are you coming in with a recommendation?
No, I'm going for the hat-trick, actually. Comment as a suggested piece of work again for Mr. Freeman. Shouldn't actually be too demanding arithmetically, but the results might be interesting. If we actually look at the age range of consultees and look at the responses to the questionnaire by age group, I'd be interested to see whether there was any significant difference between the different age groups. And also what would be quite interesting is to actually try and assume that the samples within each age group are actually representative of that age group's opinion, even though they may not be statistically significant. By that I mean, if you look at the, say for example, 40% of the population in East Devon was between age 26 and 40, then weight up to equate to 40% of the response impact, the range between 26 to 40, the responses of that age group. I think that'd be very interesting to see whether, if it didn't make a difference, then you've got a good argument for arguing for what you've presented is representative. If, however, it did show a significant difference, then I think we've got to look more closely. Proposal that we know, this is a noting thing, isn't it, if I remember? Right, I'd just like to move that we note the paper on that basis after Mr. Freeman's had a chance to respond, please.
Thanks very much. We'll go to Councillor Ryan one last time, and then we'll go over to Ed, and we'll then go over to Shelley to take us to the vote. Councillor Ryan, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out that elsewhere in the papers, there is actually a demographic breakdown of East Devon. And what was quite stark for me was the low number of young people that actually are in East Devon. I think it's off the top of my head, something like 20% under 20s, 9% in their 20s, and then gradually rising. And the over 70s were 23%. So, I mean, if you consider that over 70s is probably a sort of 30 to 40 year age bracket on the whole, it seems like we've got roughly 10% per decade. So I'm not entirely convinced that it's not well, obviously older people seem to be slightly overrepresented in the responses, but it's not quite as stark as we might think. So I just think there aren't that many young people in East Devon. So I can't remember which paper the actual demographic breakdown was, but it was in one of the other papers. Ed might remember which one it was. But yeah, so it didn't seem that striking and that appalling to me in terms of the demographic differences in the responses.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ryan. Ed, your final comments?
Thank you, Chair. I think the breakdown that Councillor Ryan is referring to is probably in the scoping report for the sustainability appraisal, which I think was appended to the next item, if that helps members. In terms of Councillor Thomas's comments, happy to look at breaking down the responses and analysing it as he suggests by age group and seeing what that shows us. We can try and incorporate that into the report to the June committee. Other things I noted, the option to answer only some of the questions, that was an option available to people, and I think a number of people did only answer some questions and not all of them, but certainly we can look to make that clearer in future and make that easier, conscious that the questionnaire was sort of a PDF type form document, so it probably gave the impression that you needed to fill that all in. And we're looking at ways of presenting the consultation differently in future using different software that perhaps makes that clearer and more flexible for people. So we're looking at ways of improving that in future. The other thing I noted was a comment that in terms of some of the questions, we didn't give people the options they wanted. I think that's where we need some further analysis. So I think someone commented about the option about housing numbers. I think it was Councillor Howe. Obviously, we didn't really give an option to have less than the 928 that the government standard methodology gives us, because there isn't really an option to have less. But it may be that, and I think there was about 22% of people that said no comment or didn't agree with any of the options. It may be that when we break down those options, actually the majority of those people perhaps said that they felt it should be less than 928. So we need to do that further analysis to understand that. But yeah, where we perhaps didn't give the option people want is because it probably isn't a realistic option, so there wasn't much point asking people that, but that may come out in the wash, as it were. Hopefully that helps. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ed. I just remember I need a seconder for Councillor Thomas's proposal. Councillor Howe?
Yes, absolutely, Chair.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Shaw, can you take us to a vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members. One element to this motion, that Strategic Planning Committee note the initial feedback received in consultation responses to the local plan issues and options report. Members, please press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you are against the motion, and raise your electronic hand to indicate that you're abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
Okay, so for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. And Chair, I have 8 votes for, no votes against, and no abstentions. So that is carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you very much, Mrs. Shaw. So agenda item 8 is the Sustainability Appraisal Scope and Consultation Feedback Report. And again, over to you, Ed, to present a report. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. So members will recall that alongside the issues and options consultation, we also consulted on a scoping report for the sustainability appraisal. So this basically acts as a baseline for how East Devon is now, against which we can assess plan proposals and policies to assess their impact on the sustainability objectives. Because of the technical nature of this work, the number of responses was quite limited, and largely from statutory consultees like the Environment Agency and Natural England, etc. I wasn't intending to go through the comments in detail, but they are summarised in the appendices to the report alongside an officer's response as to how we feel we should amend the scoping report to address the comments that we've received. So it's proposed to make some tweaks in relation to some of the comments. I think some of the other comments perhaps show a lack of understanding as to the purpose of the report, shall we say. So in some cases it wouldn't be appropriate, we don't feel, to make the suggested changes, but there's a number of changes summarised in the appendices, and the recommendation is that Strategic Planning Committee afford delegated powers to myself to make those changes to the sustainability appraisal to address the comments in the feedback report as summarised in Appendix 1. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Does any non-committee member wish to speak on this item? No. So any committee member? Silence is golden. Are we happy to propose this? Can someone give me a proposal? Councillor Davies?
Yeah, I'm happy to propose. I think there's some very interesting comments there, and I think Ed has taken a lot of it on board, and we have a useful table that outlines where the changes seem to make good points and can be incorporated. So I'm happy to move that we. What was the recommendation, to note this again, or was it?
No, so it's to.
Oh, it's to delegate, wasn't it? Yes, to afford delegated powers to the service lead to make changes to the scoping report.
Thanks very much.
I'm happy to second that, Chair, if that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chamberlain. Councillor Thomas, do you have anything, or were you just seconding?
No, I was going to volunteer to seconding and following the procedure by putting my hand up, but over to Councillor Chamberlain, I defer.
Thank you very much. So with no other comments, Mrs. Shaw, can you take us to a vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, as just mentioned, it's for the Strategic Committee to afford delegated powers to the Service Lead, Planning, Strategy and Development Management to make changes to the Sustainability Appraisal Scoping Report to address the comments made in feedback received as detailed in Appendix 1 to this report. Members, again, please press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, and raise your electronic hand to indicate you are abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
So for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. Councillor Hayward, who's a committee member, has left the meeting. So I now have, Chair, 8 votes for, no votes against and no abstention. So that is carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 9 is scoping and vision report for the new local plan. And it is over to Ed Freeman again. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Chair. So this report has 3 sort of interconnected elements to it. The first is about the scope of the plan, which we touched on already. The second is around the objectives for the plan, which were also covered in the consultation. And the third one's really trying to have an initial discussion with members about the vision for the plan and what members see the plan seeking to achieve over its plan period. So just going back through those components then, in terms of the scope of the plan, members will recall that you previously agreed to the principle of undertaking this as a single plan, effectively incorporating both the strategic elements, so the site allocations, and strategic policies, as well as the more detailed development management policies, all within a single document. And this was the initial approach that we consulted on through the issues and options consultation summarised in the earlier report. Overall responses were quite evenly split between the single plan and the multiple plan options. These are summarised in the appendix to this report, the comments that were received. And the arguments and issues with each of those options are summarised in paragraph 2.6 and the table included there within the report. Ultimately, as officers, we still feel that a single plan is the most appropriate way of moving forward in terms of plan production. We think this represents the simplest option, both in terms of production and for people to use and understand the policy framework for planning decision making that it puts into place. And also we feel that it's a shorter overall timescale for getting all of the relevant plans and allocations in place. And therefore still represents the best approach. But we're seeking through this report members' agreement to continue with production on that basis. In terms of the objectives of the plan, as I say, these were also detailed in the issues and options consultation. And again, in the appendix to this report, you have a breakdown of the comments received in regards to that. Overall, there was general support for the objectives as detailed in the consultation. Nearly 2/3 of people overall supported those objectives. Of those that did not agree the objectives, the comments suggest that this related to a number of points of detail and how the different objectives are balanced and prioritised against each other, rather than necessarily disagreeing fundamentally with the objectives as detailed. As say, officers still believe that these objectives represent an appropriate focus in terms of the objectives for the plan, and we continue to recommend those to members as the way forward for plan production. Turning then to the vision for the plan, the report is asking members to give some thought to the vision and terms of the plan in terms of what they want it to achieve for East Devon, really. What changes, if any, would they like it to lead to over the plan period? To assist in that, we've sort of highlighted the vision that was developed for the GESP, the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan, really just as an example of how this can be articulated. Obviously, that plan had a different geographic area and scope to the local plan that we're now talking about, but hopefully it gives an idea of a sort of up-to-date format and style of vision that's usually adopted in terms of plan production. We think that having a clear vision is vital to help us in terms of developing a strategy and policies through the plan that meet members' aspirations. And it could also be key to gaining government funding for key projects needed to deliver that plan and vision in the future. So I think it's quite key that we have a discussion about that as early as possible in plan production. Obviously, it can be further refined and developed as we move forward over the coming months, but it would be really useful to have a steer from members as to what they think the key priorities are at this stage, at least. The report poses a number of questions at paragraph 9.2 that are also designed to hopefully help to enable members to think about the relevant issues and give us a steer on how they see the plan moving forward and its key priorities. So there are three recommendations in the report. The first is seeking endorsement in principle to the production of a single local plan. The second relates to the objectives, and again seeking members' confirmation that they remain happy with those objectives as they focus for plan production. And the third one is asking members to consider the issue of a vision, the future of the district, and identify some initial key priorities that can help to provide a focus for plan production. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed. This is one of the main agenda items of today. Could I just ask that members refer to 9.2 in the report, the questions asked of us, and that we do give some answers to Ed on those, as well as feedback on the visioning. So we'll start off outside of committee. Does any non-committee member wish to speak at this time? No. So Councillor Howe, you're up first.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I apologise already in advance, Mr. Freeman. I get the idea of a singular local plan. I very much appreciate your thoughts on it and everything else. But we did one of these before, and there were various sections of it left out that we had to then try and do later dates. Obviously, one being the villages plan, the second being the travellers bit, which we never actually done, the travellers and gypsies plan. So we never completed our local plan last time. But doing I'm going to use emotive words because I got to a certain extent, a fast local plan within a year would not allow us, in my view, to form policies, particularly around our town centres, which need a lot more depth, thought, government input maybe, etc. And I just want to make sure that we have flexibility in this, where there are sections that would need a lot more work, that we will be able to expand that work to make sure we get the very best, particularly for our towns, in their regeneration that we've got to do. We absolutely have to do. But I don't want them to be rushed either. I want them to be very well thought out, and the best, it is going to be a guess, whatever we do, because we can't tell what the future is going to be, but the very best we can achieve in our towns for the future. So I just want that understanding that we're not all hell-bent on doing one thing, but and still have enough time and effort left or flex to allow certain parts of that local plan to be developed either alongside or separately to, so we get the real answer and way of working that we need. Otherwise, I'm quite understanding of your position, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howe. Councillor Thomas, we'll go to you next before going back to Ed.
Sorry, I thought Councillor Arnott was before me. Anyway, briefly, could I take members to Appendix 1 on page 143, please, just for a second? So I just want to raise a question on the idea of what multiple plans, because part of this is how this whole series is presented. We'll remember that we actually present to the public and to businesses we present planning as being a multi-level system anyway, with the national planning policy framework at the head, the local plans in the middle, and the detail on the ground being the neighbourhood plans. So I'm a little confused as to why we talk, so actually a single plan, we mean actually one component of a multi-level plan. Is that correct? Now, well, that's an interesting communications issue to start off with. Secondly, I think there's one big weakness of our plans. We don't half love them, and there are public sector tomes, again, multi-volume, brilliant for holding doors open, but I'm not actually sure a lot of the time how practical they are as a reference document other than in digital form. So joking apart, what I'd like to see, and I think will be more robust, would be a plan that actually sets out a strategic framework, including the appropriate modules in relation to our current requirements, our current objectives, current plans, and also has the potential to include new modules in response to evolving situations. Now, the reason I ask that is the danger if we firm in on merely producing what we term one plan, then there's the temptation to try and review all of it each time, which does rather get reinventing the wheel, I think, because the danger in these circumstances. So I don't know quite how we pull this through, but what I'd actually prefer to see, as I say, is a single local plan unit sitting within the national planning policy framework, but actually comprising a flexible number and hierarchy of individual modules that we accept can be amended and updated individually, rather than requiring the full revision of the main plan. And I think the temptation is, as I say, if you go with the single plan, the temptation is to think every time we make material change, we need to revise the whole plan. Is that helpful, Ed, or am I getting confused? Or am I confusing you?
Thanks very much, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Moulding, just welcome to the meeting. Do you have any declarations of interest at this point? We are on...
Don't believe so unless they crop up during the meeting, Chair.
No problem. Thank you very much, Councillor Moulding. Ed, can we just go over to you to cover the last two speakers' questions?
Yeah, so just perhaps it helps if I just sort of clarify what I mean when I say a single plan to start with, because obviously acknowledge it's never going to be a single plan in the sense that we're always going to have, as Councillor Thomas says, you've got the National Planning Policy Framework and the guidance that goes with that, and we're always going to have neighbourhood plans sat beneath our local plan, rather alongside the local plan as well. What we were heading towards, I suppose, when we were part of GESP was that the GESP would have taken what I'd call the core strategy elements. It would have set a strategy for the area and the large strategic allocations, and then we would have done a local plan with more detailed local level allocations and policies. What we're now trying to do is potentially bring those two together into one plan, but we could still have a core strategy that covers those strategic elements as a plan, and then do a separate plan that's the DM policies and the more local level allocations if we wanted to. And that's the sort of multiple plan option. But I think it has limited benefits. But if we do a single plan that brings those two elements together, it doesn't mean that we can't still do further development plan documents, as we have in this case, for example, the Cranbrook plan, which sort of came along afterwards. The villages plan is slightly different again, because that kind of evolved out of the local plan examination and the examiner not being happy with what we'd done with villages, that then forced us into doing that separately. But I don't see any benefit in doing that separately again. I'd rather keep that in as part of the main plan. So I'm not sure if this is making any sense, but what I'm getting at is, I think it's doing one local plan that brings together those strategic elements that would have been part of GESP and would have formed the core strategy with the local level allocations and development management policies. But if we want to in the future, we can still do other supplementary planning documents and development plan documents to deal with issues that arise, such as detailed town centre regeneration proposals, master plans of large allocations and things like that in the form of additional plans, and we would of course still have all of the neighbour plans and everything as well. So it's not that it's one plan, it's that it's a local plan in a similar form to the local plan that we've got, but incorporating the villages plan within that rather than having that as a separate element. So it is rather complicated, but hopefully that helps to make a bit more sense of things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Arnott, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just looking at the exam questions, being a good boy at the end, page 141. I'm not going to answer them all, you'll be relieved to know. So looking at C, do we think that the guest provision addresses matters or contains content we should carry forward into a new local plan? Absolutely, and I'm really glad that Mr. Freeman has included reference to GESP in this. I think we'd all agree that at the point where it was decided to leave the GESP process, we did not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So if there is information, intelligence, learning points, structural ideas that we can make use of, absolutely. I think possibly after this meeting, or perhaps the next one, we don't have to call it GESP inspired anymore. I think it's just ideas that are out there that we can claim as our own. We did the work. But yes to that one. I'm only going to answer two others, by the way, just to be relieved, just to let you have some sense of desire to carry on living. To look at the last one, G, about priorities, there's a very interesting, very nuanced question in a way that, if you want all zero carbon buildings, can you therefore secure affordable delivery? So I'd like to come at that from a slightly different angle, Chair. I think the most important thing, so to me, above all else, apart from not creating polluting buildings and going with that agenda, is that we find a way to provide attainable homes for people. That doesn't necessarily mean affordable homes delivered as part of a quota, a percentage with regards to a new development. And I'd really welcome a new way of thinking in this local plan, if we can think of a way where we maybe see if as a council somehow we can take a much greater lead and responsibility in delivering housing that people can actually afford. We take a lead on that, and I'd like it. There's going to be a lot of serious thinking on that, and then maybe look at how the traditional formula of affordables with developers works, because of course we all know in the past it simply hasn't worked. We all know that, don't we? All, let's have 40%, then 20%, and then, as in the famous case in C, 0%. So we're really interested in thinking about some strategy on that. And the final one, Chair, is on D. When you're looking at sort of economic and social aspirations, I hope as a council there's really brilliant thinking coming forward at the next cabinet about the economic benefits of the culture, leisure and tourism sectors. And it's really, really important sectors that there's a danger we take for granted because it's all around us and it just happens. So I'd love to see that included with more prominence, because obviously the other stuff that we want to do everything digital, we want high-end jobs, we want stuff that brings very qualified people here and that retains, high-level graduates and whatever. That's a given. We understand that. So I'm really interested in the kind of next tier down, so to speak, whilst remembering also the sector of the economy, which is a lot of people who will continue to work in retail and in not particularly well-paid leisure jobs, and particularly in care and social care, and in the health service and in the public sector. So I think we need to look at those. We need to look at all of those areas of aspiration and the reality, and it's about how we can do what we can do to provide homes that those people can afford. That seems to be the key thing that should be, what do they call it? The golden thread. There we go. The golden shot for those who are a certain age. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnott. Councillor Blakey, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to Councillor Arnott for completely stealing my thunder on a couple of the points, particularly with regard to GESP. I knew he would. It won't be the last time. Now, going back again to the questions at 9.2, page 141, 142, and how that relates to priorities. We're looking at the last question. The one thing that I think that, this was discussed in the meeting a few days ago, the one thing that I think is the scourge of everybody's life and is becoming so again is it's moving around. It's transport, particularly during the early and late parts of the working day. In the west end of East Devon, it's becoming difficult again, and so. For me, I think an objective, and let's be honest, the objectives have got to be achievable. An objective we really should be aiming for is better public transport throughout East Devon. And one of the things that I think that certainly we've seen in Cranbrook, and I'm sure it is the same elsewhere, is how public transport is not joined up. If you want to get a bus that takes you to a railway station at an appropriate time to catch a train, you've got next to no chance. It's a lottery. There's no thinking that runs alongside the various companies that operate these transport businesses, because, and they admit it themselves, they each see each other as competition. They're not in their view working to a common end. With one aim, their job is to maximise their passenger numbers, and if they can make it as difficult as they can for the opposition, then good-o. That in this day and age is daft. So I'd like to see, frankly, getting a few heads together and give them a good banging together, because I think that's what it needs. In terms of what needs to be done physically. It's been on the stocks for a while, but the main railway line through East Devon, the Exeter to Waterloo line, desperately needs further passing loops. I say plural, to enable a more frequent service to be offered. One of the downsides to the existing arrangement is that for most of East Devon, it's simply not possible to get a service more frequently than once an hour. And in terms of connecting with those services that do exist and which will hopefully improve, is to make it easier and cheaper for people to use them. The railway industry say that if you build stations and if you put services on, they will be used, and they've got now some decades of evidence of that. So a simple improvement that I believe we can make is to get people to drive their cars, if they've got to drive their cars from their villages where there is no public transport, get them to a rail hub or even a bus hub where they can park their cars very, very cheaply, and then get the train. And let's be honest, most of the people that we're talking about here are heading to Exeter to work. Let's get them into the habit of using cheap public transport and make it convenient and cheap for them to do so. An idea I have on that line, and I'm going into too much detail, I appreciate, would be cheap parking passes for the railway station car parks across the district, to enable people to go to and from work without breaking the bank. And as I say, if we can get Network Rail into a position where we can have a 30-minute service along that route, I think that would take up a fair bit of the slack that needs to be taken up to enable the road transport to get us back to the happy days we were in only a few months ago, when the roads were much less busy. So yeah, I'll shut up at that point. One for Ed to consider.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blakey. Councillor Davies, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, going back to the questions, I can see the attraction of setting the strategic direction only in a plan. But as I'm often fond of saying, the devil is in the detail when it comes to carbon reduction especially. And so you might as well have that in the plan. And as Ed has said, you can always produce supplementary documents afterwards, and I'm sure we will on more specific issues. And as far as the main priorities, obviously for me, we need to make sustainability and carbon reduction the priority. And I'm confident, given the statements that we have in our council plan or that we're discussing at the moment, that will be the main focus. And I'd also like to see us avoid what I think is a false dichotomy that somehow implies that carbon reduction and economic prosperity are somehow incompatible, that you can have one but not the other. I simply don't agree with that. And I think we have an opportunity at the moment to do that and to move forward and ensure we do have economic prosperity, but also that we concentrate on carbon reduction. It's just who prospers.
Very much, Councillor Davies. Councillor Ryan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say how very reassuring it is to see just how many of the respondents are very supportive of our aims to tackle environmental change and climate change. And I suspect this is probably quite a major departure from when the last plan was made. And in many respects, this is actually why we need to do a new local plan, because the whole foundation for the old local plan is not really fit to tackle climate change and environmental change and address and redress and improve certain things that have actually gone very badly wrong. That, some of the comments were saying that we shouldn't be making a new local plan, we should just be going with the old one. But actually, in my opinion, the old one is so flawed in respect of climate change and tackling environmental degradation that actually we desperately do need a new local plan. We have only got a few short years in which to address this, and we need to do it jolly quickly if we actually want to make enough of an effect to be able to we can't halt climate change at the moment, but we can slow it down by acting swiftly and in the right ways. And I think that everything we do to do with planning has got to be focused on limiting damage to the environment from now on, and also reversing damage to the environment, which are not the same thing. So I was actually very comforted to see how many people share our aims in their responses, because I strongly suspect that a few years ago this would not have been the case. So I think a sea change in public opinion happened, and it's good to see. It means that we will have the wind in our sails on this, which is a very good place to be in terms of making fairly swinging changes. And that's really, I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say that. I just think that we do need to go with this groundswell of public opinion, which is actually helping us at the moment. So that's why we do need to rewrite this plan, make a whole new plan, and not just go with the old one. Thank you. Thanks
very much, Councillor Ryan. Just to try and sum up what everyone's saying, personally, myself, I think climate change should be our top priority for this plan period, and that's what we should be passing on to the officers, that climate change should be at the heart of everything that we are doing, followed by the delivery of infrastructure. I think Councillor Blakey said it, well, he's quite parochial with his talking about his patch, but it's across the district. We need to start delivering infrastructure, and particularly green infrastructure. And if that is at the expense of affordable housing, I would be happy to put that forward. I think affordable housing is a con. It's leveled at people that are 2 or 3 years away from gaining housing anyway, whereas what we should be targeting is social housing. And I hope the housing TAF that's coming forward will be making recommendations that will see us back housing delivery of social housing for the district to cover any lesser amounts of affordable housing that might come forward. But that would be my recommendation to the committee, that we give the steer to Ed and the team to have climate change at the top priority, followed by infrastructure delivery, and that could come at the expense of some affordables. Councillor Howe.
Thank you. And I don't want to disagree with what you've just said, but I suppose I do need to have a word of caution about what you've just said, because we do have to house people.
Yeah.
And you're dead right. I hope a miracle happens and our TAF comes up with a magic wand, and I'm not being facetious or anything, but you know what I mean, and solves the problem. But I don't believe it will on its own, and I believe our local plan will have to take some of that. And we do know the public has already told us that they, yes, believe green, and we need to do all the green, the carbon zero stuff as well. But their opinion is, or the majority opinion, people think it should be possibly further down the track. So it's a path we are on, but not necessarily from day one of the new local plan. So I do believe maybe we need to stage it, because as we know, time goes on, technology gets better, prices come down, etc., etc., etc. If my belief is, if we did it from day one, our affordable housing, whatever clarification you want to put on it, if you get my meaning, would be limited by viability. And it would make the situation worse, if you get my meaning. And it's that seesaw we're on of balancing the two equation. So I think we need to be careful about what we're doing. I fully agree in the green agenda, but I do think we need to step it up over time. Maybe every 2 or 3 years, ratchet up a tiny bit more, so that we're getting that equation of value back as well. So as I say, I'm just a word of caution, I think, from what we have to achieve, but not denying your overall ambition, shall we say. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Howe. Councillor Arnold?
Yes, coming in behind Councillor Howe with notes of caution. As you know, Chair, comms is my thing. So this is potentially a very exciting and innovative way of leading towards more social housing. But the message for this has to be extremely clear, and we better make sure as a council that our housing company or some such other entity is up and running pretty early, in the next 6 months, because obviously our message from this council is not that we no longer believe in affordable homes. Of course we do. There'll be planning applications that are currently going through. Yes, please. But I think what you're suggesting is an innovative way of looking at the realities that Councillor Howe has often referred to as well, that these things aren't delivered. So that's my only word of caution there. But I admire your courage.
Ed, do you have anything you wish to comment at this time? I know there's been a lot of speakers in between.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's useful so far in terms of the discussion. Clearly, climate change is coming out as the top priority for a lot of people, which I think is useful clarification. I would say, coming back to Councillor Blakey's comments, I think we touched on a number of things that are beyond our control in terms of planning. For example, I don't have control. We don't have control as planning authority in terms of what public transport services are delivered to enhance them, or indeed what's charged for car parking at railway stations. What we can obviously do is try and focus growth around public transport hubs and nodes where good public transport is available, to ensure that residents of new developments can utilise public transport and be more reliant than other areas of the district where those services don't exist. And obviously through the collection of infrastructure funding from developments, we can seek to fund projects like Passing Loop on the Exeter to Waterloo railway line to try and enhance services along that corridor. That then brings us into questions about where growth is focused and whether or not that corridor is seen as a focus for growth, which was certainly something that was being looked at through the work that was done on the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan. Members will recall, and there's obviously a discussion we'll no doubt come to in the coming months as the year progresses. I think the other issue that I just pick up on is this balance between affordable housing and how that's balanced with other priorities. It is, of course, worth saying that we are obliged and required to address our housing needs, both market and affordable, through the plan in order for it to be found sound. And also, obviously, the governments have put in requirements about the delivery of affordable products. So there will always have to be an element of affordable housing. I think the point that, as I understood you were making, Chair, was that currently our proportions of affordable housing are quite high in parts of the districts where we've got 50% requirement in some areas, 25% in others. If I understand correctly, what you were suggesting was perhaps reducing those percentages to enable more money to be spent on delivery of infrastructure and higher standards of responding to climate change through those developments, but that we still are delivering significant amounts of affordable housing through that route as well. And that is part of the balance, and there is a potential to make a compromise like that, but I don't think the plan would be found sound if we were seeking to completely abandon affordable housing provision, but I don't think anyone was suggesting that anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Just get you to speak for me every time, Ed. Said it a lot better than I could. Yeah, exactly. We've got the requirements through the NPPF that we have to abide by, but obviously the percentages that we do ask for now is way above those. If we could reduce them, we can increase infrastructure, which is a huge bugbear, I think, for residents across the district. So moving on to the recommendations, Ed, do you feel that you've been given enough steer on identifying the key priorities and outcomes?
Well, if I could perhaps refer to the questions at 9.2, I think there's a few of them that I haven't heard any comment on. I suppose particularly around, I think there was reference to the guest vision. Are there particular elements of the guest vision that people are happy for us to incorporate into vision for our local plan, or not happy for us to incorporate? Perhaps would be an interesting extension, shall I say, of question C on there. Things like question D, are there particular growth and development agendas that we should be following or avoiding? Is there a particular focus between economic, environmental or social aspirations? And sort of climate change, I think, has been a focus which cuts across a number of those. But are there other aspirations? Yeah, things like that, I suppose. I mean, I'm happy to go away and we can try and draft the vision for members to consider at a future meeting. But it'd be interesting to hear to what extent that should reflect the guest vision, or if there are particular elements of that that members weren't happy with that we should be mindful of.
Thanks very much, Ed. Councillor Thomas, you're up first.
Well, as somebody who was actually working on the GESP on behalf of this council whilst leader, I think it's important that we don't squander any aspect of the GESP project, which was a very significant piece of work done by a specific series of officers, largely out with our own officers within this council. And the point with it is it covers the requirements and covers planning requirements and strategy to a much greater level, a strategic level on a regional basis rather than specifically just restricted to one district. Now, there's no getting away from the fact that particularly picking up on the Chair's comments about infrastructure funding, which I absolutely agree with, and the same with Councillor Blakey, infrastructure funding is big bucks. Big bucks requires significant development one way or another. And so with that in mind, I think we're much more likely to secure that the more we can actually integrate that sort of level of funding, the more we can integrate with Exeter City Council, Devon County Council, Teambridge and Mid Devon, in very much in the same way as the GESP was structured. Now, I'm sorry this was heresy to some, but as you'll remember, unfortunately, I wasn't able to speak on the GESP at the full council meeting when the decision was made to throw it out, which was a great disappointment at the time. But as I say, that doesn't now stop us using all the resources, all the investment that we and others made into the GESP, particularly, for example, if you're looking at Homes England funding, for example, for significant road or rail infrastructure, there's no question at all that by doing that on a regional basis rather than simply as a district basis, because at the end of the day, we're big in our own back garden, but overall we're actually very small. We're a very small budget council, and the sort of investment to make our communities sustainable is not insignificant. So as I say, all I would say, Chair, and hopefully get wider support for, is the fact that all aspects of the GESP should be considered as being brought into play. We shouldn't be scared of picking the good bits from it, and also considering seriously some of the basic strategies behind it right across the board. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davies, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the GESP, I think the chapter on the climate emergency and the response to that, and zero carbon development are very useful and well worth making sure we incorporate into our local plan. Under the question that Ed asked on economic, I think what I would like to see is an emphasis on economic activity being local, where money circulates in the local economy and doesn't simply bleed out of the local economy to big companies and shareholders elsewhere. And also, obviously, not damaging the environment, so we give priority to businesses that enhance rather than damage the environment. In fact, I think we'd want to positively discourage those. And although I don't think there's a lot we can do about farming, but farmers are stewards of our countryside, and we do need to ensure that farming is enhancing rather than damaging the environment in that sense as well. But how we go about that, I don't know, because that's not necessarily an area of development that we have control over. But we certainly do over housing and road building and so on. Obviously, I would like to see the emphasis on things that are going to assist our move towards a low carbon economy rather than go the opposite direction.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davies. Councillor Blakey, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks also to Councillor Davies, who has also stolen my thunder, because I wanted to refer to question D on the list that Ed Freeman was asking us to consider. And essentially, I agree with what Councillor Davies said, which is that we must emphasise local small-scale development of business, because it has both an economic and environmental advantage. And small businesses tend to grow much more quickly into bigger businesses. So there's an opportunity there for employment growth at a rate that would not be achieved generally by larger businesses. So I think that there are a lot of benefits to going that way. And I go further and say that I think that the council should be prepared to invest in the hardware, the buildings. Let's look at the economic rental opportunities for those buildings in all of the towns and villages across the district. Try not to be too parochial here, Ed. Let's be very widespread on this and see if we can get more people working where they live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arnott, over to you.
Sorry, it's me again, Chair. Sorry, I keep blipping on and off. Bad bandwidth. Yeah, just to address Councillor Thomas's point, which obviously I agree with, because I've made that point previously. Two things. Well, I'm going to ask Ed for a clarification, which I hope is helpful. But first of all, can I just clear something up, because I know it's been a bit of a open wound. I do know this to be genuinely the case, that on the night of the debate about GESP, when, as Ian says, he was not able to speak, the reason which the chair will confirm to him that she wanted to move to the vote was that that meeting was, in her view, already descended into absolute chaos. And I do back her on that. And I think it is, can I say to him personally, I think it's unfortunate that he wasn't called. I do agree with that, but I do hope that, you know, on reflection, he will realise that the chair was in a really difficult position. And I can say somebody who has chaired some very tough meetings of cabinet, as she has had to do of council, that there are the same 3 or 4 very over-enthusiastic contributors who make it almost impossible to chair a virtual meeting. So I'm just putting that out there now, and I hope you may see something in that. But what I'd like to ask Ed is, so Ed, can you just let us know where we are in the joint strategic body that has already been set up between Exeter, ourselves, Mid Devon and Teignbridge? Just to, because I'm slightly concerned, I don't think we've had a paper presenting that to strategic planning in recent months, and it might be quite useful to do something that reflects where we've got to and what kind of structures are already, you know, in place. Through you, Chair.
Ed, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I think there was a report last year, perhaps October, November time, in terms of the principle of moving forward with a non-strategic joint plan, which was agreed. And we've been working on details of governance arrangements for that, a timetable and resourcing for that plan and how that would come forward. And of course, the scope of the plan, which is obviously key as well. That report should be coming to you at your June meeting, which we'll be working up jointly with officers with the other partner authorities. And then obviously that will have to go through, if I recall, through to council as a decision to either proceed with that approach or not. So there has been lots of work going on in the background in terms of developing that and finding a way through in terms of moving forward with that joint non-strategic plan. So joint strategic plan. Non-statutory. That's what I was thinking of. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks very much, Ed. We'll go to Councillor Chamberlain next. I am still keen to hear from all members. So Councillor Pratt, Councillor Hayward, Councillor Moulding, if you have anything to add, I feel this is a really important agenda item that I'd welcome all your thoughts on. So Councillor Chamberlain, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I agree completely. This is really important going forward, the vision, the plan, about what we do. I do understand and I do agree climate emergency is sort of at the top. However, just sort of listening to it, I'm thinking to myself, putting these things in order. The problem is that I almost put climate emergency together with infrastructure, because if we don't put the correct infrastructure in place, we're not helping ourselves with the climate emergency plan to reduce carbon. Because if the infrastructure is not there where we're putting the new houses in, then people are having to drive because they haven't got the infrastructure to use to walk, i.e. I know it's coming forward, and I'll speak about it later, but the Clears Valley Trail connecting up all these different places, all the new areas coming forward for expansion, and just connecting them up. So vision going forward is to see, yes, that we do have the correct housing in the right place. We've obviously got our climate emergency, but at the same time, we need to really strongly be thinking about the infrastructure that connects those all up. Because if that's not in place with the rail, with the roads, with everything, with walking, then we're almost putting ourselves backwards by saying we're going to achieve this on our climate policy, but actually we're not putting the infrastructure in, so we're making people drive further. We're putting in new towns, more into the countryside, which is great. We're providing housing for our residents. However, we're not then bringing up on par with that the infrastructure to allow the communities then to become green as part of that policy. So for me, the vision going forward is that actually we start connecting all these things up, as opposed to having them in really high priorities, like number one is climate change. Well, actually, let's incorporate them all a little bit. I know they have to go in order of importance, but it's really important going forward, because it frustrates me so much when I see new sites developed with new housing. They put in the road infrastructure and it's lovely. We move in the residents. 6 months later, they're digging the road up, they're diverting the traffic, which has to go 5 miles around to get across a half a mile stretch. And they then have to lay the road again. So I would love to see vision going forward, actually some synchronised thinking between all of these aspects going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chamberlain. Does any member who hasn't spoken yet wish to speak? No. Councillor Hayward, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reinforce what Councillor Chamberlain said, you know, this is the potential for us to be, you know, average, to just do what that we think is the right thing, or this is a golden opportunity to be exceptional, you know, to use that phrase, outstanding, you know, to try and aspire to be the gold standard that every other district, that every other planning authority looks to and says, well, you know, East Devon managed to do it. East Devon aspired and went for gold instead of just accepting bronze. You know, and that's not a saying, you know, we won't give it our best effort, we will. But sometimes it's easy just to take the path of least resistance and not do the difficult things because it's hard, but the benefits of doing that are profound. And, you know, we have here a cross-party group that represents an entire council encapsulated here. There's nothing we can't achieve. You know, we have officer resource, we have members who are keen to see the right thing for East Devon. We all live here. This is the point. We all live here and we want the very best for East Devon residents and in part for ourselves. You know, we've chosen East Devon as a home. So really, I think aspiration and really reaching out, taking a longer view and providing all the things. But, you know, Councillor Chamberlain's, you know, I agree wholeheartedly with what she said and other speakers. I really do. But I think we just need to not do the bare minimum to get us over the line. We need to go above and beyond. And I'm willing to put the time in, and I'm sure everyone here is as well, because it will actually pay dividends for decades to come, long after we've stepped down and we're, you know, old and retired. The people, the children and our grandchildren, they'll reap the benefits of what we do now. So yeah, that's it really, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hayward. Can I ask members that we start looking towards creating a recommendation to give to Ed, and that we start formulating that? Councillor Chamberlain, back to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was just really to come back to that and say, this is a vision which is brilliant for our plan, but I'd like it to be a vision that we're looking at for the next, what's it going to be like in 5 years' time? Because we can put a plan together now and it'll be great, but it'll be outdated in 2 years' time. Things change, planning policies change massively. There's a new planning policy set to come out with commercial units that can be changed to residential. It's going to change things massively in the future. And I just want us as a council, exactly like Councillor Hayward's just said, to be that vision for the future. Have a think, what's it going to be like in 5 years? I know we can't see into the future, but we've all been around long enough to see things change quite quickly and be sort of planning that much more ahead if we can, for it to be sustainable and not looking back on it and going, well, we now need to change that. Well, it's only been there for a couple of years. So for me, it's very much about the vision now, but the vision for the future for us and building something that we're proud of, as well as sustainable. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any member have a recommendation that they'd like to bring forward? Don't all jump at once. Councillor Arnott.
Well, no, actually, Chair, I was wondering whether you might have one from the Chair for us, given you spoke very clearly about this earlier. I don't know. What do you think? Well, I mean, looking at the recommendations as they are, it's clear, isn't it, that number one, is we'd agree with, that Strategic Planning Committee endorse in principle the approach of producing a single local plan only. I think that's what people are saying. Number two, that members consider the consultation responses and confirm that these remain the objectives they wish the plan to focus on. I think that was okay. I think that's what people are saying. But number three which is this balance, isn't it, between climate, infrastructure, affordables, with an implied commitment to get social housing built. That needs some careful wording, and I'm not up for that. Anybody else? Councillor Thomas is looking lively, maybe.
Councillor Ryan, you want to take a go?
Well, thank you, Chair. Now, I was just wondering whether we actually want an implied commitment to social housing or whether we want an overt commitment to social housing in our recommendations. Because I'm always a bit nervous of implied and assumed things, particularly when we're talking about legal documents. Because my understanding, my perception is that if there's a get-out clause, it will be used by certain parties. So I'm wondering if we wouldn't actually like to put social housing in as a recommendation, since we all seem to be pretty much agreed on it. And I think a number of the respondents did seem to mention housing for young people. I mean, properly affordable housing. I mean, the climate has got to be in there as a top priority, and that's also supported by a lot of the responses. Infrastructure, well, I think if we've learned anything from the last 20 years is that we're not delivering large amounts of new housing in the right way, and with the infrastructure delivered in the right at the right speed. And I do wonder whether that's something we could consider addressing through the new local plan. I just think, okay, at the basis, I think there's a major problem with delivering infrastructure on the back of development rather than ahead of development. And that's not necessarily something that we can address as a little local authority. But I do think that we shouldn't necessarily go along with the madness of delivering thousands of houses before we even think about how we're going to get some infrastructure in there. I can see Ed sort of like he's looking slightly nervous now. I just think that if we want to be harmonious in the way we develop East Devon, and if we want acceptance and buy-in from people who live here already, then we need to make the process as streamlined as possible for them, whilst also trying to meet our climate change and carbon reduction aims. And I think one of the things that is the source of greatest stress is people's lives changing very fast in negative ways and in ways that they have no control over. And I'm thinking especially at the moment of the increased stress on our very small medieval roads. And, you know, the way people have been going into work has, you know, it's gone from, say, 20 minutes to 40 minutes in 10 years. And I can see why people are stressed by that. And I can see why they might.
We've lost Councillor Rylance. So if we just go to Councillor Thomas.
Promise, Chair, I didn't touch any buttons at all. And absolutely nothing to do with that happening. I've got, as soon as I think Councillor Arnott decided I was frisky, and all but apologised for the fact I wasn't allowed to speak on the important guest debate as the only person who represented.
Kick against new development concerns have not been.
Oh, hang on, we're back.
Yeah, do come back in, Eleanor.
quickly, he says, quickly. I do actually have.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, would you like me to wait until let Councillor Ryan have another go? Because I would like to come back.
No, well, I just, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Councillor Ryan. You just finish your point. Councillor Thomas was halfway through his point.
I think I have finished my point, actually. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you very much. Councillor Thomas, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm sure that's a beautiful sign back for the newspapers this evening, wasn't it? Councillor Thomas census as Councillor Rylands. So that'll be the first. Anyway, totally nothing to do with me. Finally, I've got I think, anybody remember the council plan? You remember that document that we're all working on that's meant to highlight our priorities for the council, how they're going to be funded and all the bits associated with it? Can I be sort of revolutionary and actually change recommendation 3 to read? The members consider the council plan as a vision for the future of the district and identifying initial key priorities and outcomes for the new local plan to provide the focus for future plan production. How's that? Heaven forbid we've got two documents talking to each other.
I think that seems incredibly sensible, Councillor Thomas. Councillor
I am sometimes, Chair, I am.
I think you're coming into second, aren't you?
I am indeed, yes, because I have already referred to the council plan and its aspirations in discussing this document. And it seems sensible to me that the two plans relate to each other, and the council plan in some sense actually sets the strategic direction that we're looking for, and that the local plan is the detail of how we achieve that. So absolutely, I think that's a really good point, Councillor Thomas, and I thank you for your suggestion. Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Mrs. Shaw, you wish to speak.
I was only going to offer a form of words just to get debate started, but can I just confirm that Councillor Thomas's third recommendation, what element of the recommendation was that members consider the council plan as the vision for the future of the district council, which identifies initial key priorities and outcomes for the new local plan to provide a focus for the future plan production. Is that the wording that you provided, Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, it was just, it wasn't the vision for the future of the district council, it was for the future of the district.
District, yep, okay, which identifies.
Many thanks. Councillor Arnott, last chance.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. I said he's frisky, and he was. In he came with a just dash of brilliance, I thought. It's been welling up for some months, and here it now is. Sorry, can we get the reference to GESP in there as well, Chair? Is that worth, I don't know if that's, whether that's just something we're noting because it's in the report and we've debated it, or whether that needs to be explicitly mentioned. I mean, I'm agnostic on it. I don't know what you feel.
I don't think it needs to. It's in the report and it's in the answers that we've given to Ed. I think Ed can mop it all up and make of it what he wills. I know he's going to be taking this home and re-watching the video over and over again as homework. So, Ed, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I think discussions have been helpful, at least in my mind, to focus on where members' minds are, you know, I'm taking it it's around a sort of joined up approach to a clean growth agenda. I suppose what I would say in terms of Councillor Thomas's suggestion, I do appreciate the relationship with the council plan, and I think there's a comment in the report about clearly there's a close relationship between the two, but I think the local plan does need a vision of its own that's focused very much on the planning outcomes that we're looking to achieve. So I do see them as slightly separate. And my only concern with the recommendation is that we're then waiting on the council plan, which I understand is still a couple of months away. I was hoping to sort of bring back some further visioning work through Strategic Planning Committee in June. So having said that, I think the discussion that you've had was actually really helpful in terms of focusing my mind in terms of what needs to go into that vision. And if I can summarise what I understand, as I say, I think it's around the clean growth agenda, where we want to see growth and development, but that needs to be clean growth, where we're trying to focus on a low carbon economy, growth that minimises people's need to move, as it were, so encouraging home working, trying to reduce commuting where people do have to move and commute, that it's done through sustainable transport means. So we're investing in the infrastructure to help that to happen. And we're supporting local entrepreneurs and local business to grow and develop through an economic strategy that's focused more around that and the kind of delivering the kind of workspaces and environment that's needed to encourage local businesses to grow. So I would see from what members have said, developing a vision that's around that picks up on the priorities that were in the guest vision as well, and adapts those to the specifics of the East Devon requirements. And if members are happy, potentially we could work up a draft vision on that basis to bring back to you in June to debate the issue a bit further, by which time obviously discussions on the council plan will also have progressed to help to inform that discussion further. But does that help, Chair?
Yeah, it does indeed. Just would it help if to Councillor Thomas's recommendation, we added statement of intent, which is already done, and then obviously the statement of intent and council plan, and so the council plan can come and that can shape it further. But the statement of intent's already done, so that can help you with your visioning now. Councillor Thomas, would you be okay with that?
No, not really. Number of grounds. Number 3 little points. Firstly, really pleased that the leader's now an evangelist of guests. I knew we'd convert him in the end. Secondly, I think we don't need to include that in the recommendation. Recommendation for me needs to be clean. The council plan is, for me, fundamentally linked with the local plan. It has to be. It's a nonsense if it isn't. So I really wouldn't be too concerned about a couple of months delay if there's a perception that that's likely to be the case, because I think the next sessions are due for May 11th, I think is the next session of the council plan, which actually was quite a fun session last time. So I would quite like to keep the guest bit out, the resolution really as it was presented, and the intimate and direct link to the council plan maintained, and simply maintained, please, if we could. So basically, as I originally presented it.
Thank you very much. We're getting multiple people coming in now. Councillor Arnott, and then I think we'll just leave it at that and we'll go to a vote.
Sorry, Chair, 15 seconds. Yes, I suppose the only thing I'm slightly concerned about where we've got to is that the recommendations are really good. I just hope we've captured all of the discussions around those questions, A through to G. I mean, I did throw something in about, cultural leisure tourism as part of the economy and the distinction between that and the high-end digital and whatever. So obviously we can't capture that in the recommendations, but I hope that that kind of stuff makes the minutes. But other than that, absolutely. And yes, obviously as the great heretic of GESP, I'm very happy for it to be left out of any recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Shaw, can you summarise and take us to a vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, you've got 3 elements to the recommendation before you. Firstly, that Strategic Planning Committee endorse in principle the approach of producing a single local plan only that covers all key planning policy matters. Secondly, that members consider the consultation responses to the proposed objectives for the new local plan and confirm that these remain the objectives that they wish the plan to focus on. And thirdly, that members considered the council plan as a vision for the future of the district, which identifies initial key priorities and outcomes for the new local plan to provide a focus for future plan production. Members, please press your green tick if you are in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
And for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place.
I'm afraid I can't vote that way. I'm on the phone now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howe. So, Chair, I have from your committee of 11 members in total, I have 9 votes for, no votes against, and no abstentions indicated. Thank you.
Does Councillor Howe wish to indicate his vote verbally if he can't do it?
Shirley.
I would love to vote positively.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're in support of the motion. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. That takes us to 10 in total in support, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all. At this point, I think you'll be taking a 5-minute comfort break. I know it will really upset Councillor Thomas, but I think we need to look after our officers here. So if we come back at 10:02, I'll see you all then. Thanks very much. Are we all ready to resume?
I pretty much am. Just you and me then, Dan.
Yes, Chair.
Ready when you are.
Thank you very much.
I was going to say we could make some decisions, but then Ed turned up.
Moving on to agenda item 10, the local plan engagement with site promoters through the local plan process, pages 169 to 172. Ed Freeman to present a report, and it's over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Chair. So this report's arisen really from a series of inquiries we've had from various site promoters and developers, both through us as officers and I understand through a number of members as well, seeking an audience with either officers or members to present about the sites that they are putting forward or have put forward through the call for sites and are currently being considered through the HELAR process. Historically, developers have often sought to present their proposals to garner feedback from officers and members on those proposals as we've progressed through the local plan process. And really this report is about trying to consider options for how that should appropriately be done, mindful of the requests that we're receiving, and obviously I think a desire to have appropriate conversations about the sites and options coming forward, but also to do that in an open and transparent way. So we've considered a number of options in this report. Just to quickly go through them, the first one was obviously one option is to not engage through that process, but I do think that that's a potentially problematic route. There will be stages where we need to hear from developers and landowners and understand their intentions with regard to sites. And I think it's important that plan production isn't closed, that we have an open conversation, not just with our communities, but with developers and landowners as well. The second option is about written engagement only, and just engaging in written submissions and writing back. This would ensure that all conversations are properly recorded and documented, but is quite limited in terms of the kind of conversations, questions and answers that could be achieved through that route. Engagement through site-specific meetings is seen as an alternative option, which would enable potentially developers to come in and present to a panel or group of officers and members potentially on their proposals. But I'm a bit concerned that could take up a significant proportion of both officers and members at time. We've obviously given ourselves quite a demanding timetable for plan production, and taking too much time in those sorts of meetings would obviously take valuable resources away from actually progressing production of the plan. Similar to that is an option about engagement via a member working party or other group. We do have the members advisory panels that are established through the pre-application process for specific proposals. So we could model something similar for this route. Again, it could have significant resource implications, however. An alternative is also to have engagement simply through this committee, which also ensures that it's very open and transparent, being a publicly broadcast meeting. Again, there are resource implications, but we would be envisaging coming back to members towards the end of the year with the sites and their assessments that have come through the HELAR process. And so hearing from developers and site promoters at that stage would seem logical, but would need carefully managing, I would suggest, through the meeting. And we'll need to provide sufficient time for that to happen, which is difficult to budget for, not knowing exactly how much demand there might be from developers and site promoters to address the committee at that time. However, balancing up all of the options, I do think option 5 is probably the best option in terms of being open and transparent and minimising the impact on resources overall, whilst also ensuring that members have the correct information in front of them when considering site options. So the recommendation is that members are asked in the first recommendation to consider the options I've outlined and agree to pursue option 5 as detailed in the report. And then recommendation 2 is asking members to agree that a special meeting of the committee then be held in November to accommodate those presentations from developers and site promoters, the detailed arrangements of which to be delegated to myself in consultation with the chair to work through how that might work. I think realistically that would probably have to be at least a full day meeting to accommodate that, but we'll perhaps have to put some feelers out and understand demand and how much time would be needed to set aside for each presenter. But sticking to the principles at this stage, at least, the recommendation is to pursue option 5. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed. So it's pretty easy. Committee members, 1, 2, 3 or 5, take your pick. So non-committee members first. Does anyone wish to speak? No, so Councillor Ryan, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I had 2 questions actually. So my first question is this. I presume that going through strategic planning would be a departure from the way it's been done before. So how are we going to alert landowners and agents to the fact that, you know, they can now approach us in a different way? So that's my first question. My second question is, we've probably got quite a lot of knowledge already about sites that are available through the HELAR, through the guest process and through neighbourhood planning. Are we going to be following up on some of those to find out if they're still available to the local plan? I mean, I can't imagine that they wouldn't be, but how are we going to follow up on those? Those are my 2 questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ryan. We'll come to Ed in a second. Councillor Blakey, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I disagree with the recommendation in this instance. I think that the input of the local ward members would be invaluable in almost all cases. And I think that to exclude ward members from discussions with developers, if they choose to attend, would be a mistake. I think the ward members have a lot of knowledge on what has been successful in the past, what hasn't, and that they should get the opportunity to speak to the developers and give them their views. I think in practice, it will actually save a little bit of time in the longer term, because if plans come forward that then the town or parish council disagree with, or the local members disagree with, you're going to end up with an objection. So for me, I accept what Mr. Freeman says about under option 3, that there is a potential for requiring more resource. But I think that there has to be perhaps a hybrid between 3 and 5 that will enable ward members to meet the developers and discuss this as well. Thanks.
Just for a bit of clarity, Councillor Blakey, the strategic planning meeting would be for all members. It would just be a strategic planning meeting. So ward members could attend and could speak their site specific to their ward. It would just be held as a strategic planning meeting.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. Understood, because my slightly sideways reading of it was that it would be for committee members only, but no, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
Full membership.
Yeah.
Councillor Thomas. Oh,
thank you,
keep
Chair.
doing it to Councillor Arnott, sorry. Councillor Arnott, you're next. I've done it to him a few times. I need to call in first. Sorry.
I think it's. Will you try calling him first now or not?
Yeah, if I can. I've done it to him 3 times today.
Why has he started moaning?
Who's going? Is it me or Ian?
Councillor
It looks like me.
You're
Looks like me.
I'll defer to you, Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I was only going to say that Councillor Blakey stole all of my thunder. So thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to make exactly that point. Very reassured by what you have said, Chair, that the ward members will have, as they do at a normal planning meeting, you know, sort of a very good forum within that strategic planning meeting. I think that's excellent. Yeah, number 5, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. Without any question, I like the idea of somehow making these sort of investigations of significant strategic sites more open and transparent. I think that's a move in the right direction, and obviously that's supported by option 5. Couple of things though. I think what we've got to be very careful here is, firstly, the relationship between strategic planning committee and development management. I think there's a real danger when you start actually effectively a great public discussion about individual development sites, that things are made or commitments inferred that actually are out with the remit of the strategic planning committee. Because obviously we shouldn't ride roughshod over the operational role of the development management committee. You would obviously have to consider specific applications for any sites that do ultimately come forward. As I say, there's obviously legal considerations in that as well. And also the question is in terms of good use of time, I noticed that we've got cost has finally appeared in one of the reports for strategic planning, which I'm pleased about, but it only relates to officer cost. But the question then is, how good use of funds is it when there are particular areas that clearly I think will come forward and will probably come forward with widespread support for development of some significant scale, and other areas, for example, that wouldn't. As to question is whether there's actually much point at this early stage actually bringing those sites forward to a wider debate or wider discussion. It's a moot point, but the danger is to say we spend a whole day looking at sites that quite clearly are not going to be within the focus of the plan.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Howe, you've got your hand up. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for being back. I go for option 5 quite clearly. I've listened to Councillor Thomas, and I understand his concerns about the separation of strategic planning and the planning committee. But of course, this is about setting the plan. It's not about individual applications. We need these sites to come forward as part of our local plan, and then they'll be part of the policy for the planning committee to decide afterwards. So just to try and reassure him on that. But option 5, you know, it's got to be, no choice, and I move that wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I get a seconder for that, please? Councillor Davies, thank you very much. Ed, is there any way that you can alleviate the worries of Councillor Thomas a little bit?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Councillor Howe. I think there is a different purpose to this than development management. I think that's all in about how we communicate that to the site developer or promoter to make it clear the purpose of the meeting, the scope of that meeting, and the nature of the comments that will be made to ensure that they're not taken out of context and considered to prejudice the council's position on a planning application, which I think is fundamentally what Councillor Thomas is concerned about. So I agree we need to take care on that, and we'll obviously do that in the communications that we present to those coming to present to the meeting. I think on the other point about ensuring that the sites are sort of within the focus of the plan, I see that as part of the benefit of option 5, is that it means that we have an answer to developers who approach us now to sort of say, well, no, there will be this opportunity for you to present later in the year. And by leaving it until November, we're doing it at a time when we've had a discussion through Strategic Planning Committee about the strategy of the plan. We hopefully will, through that work, have refined down to an area of search where we're looking, where we want development to take place. And then we can hear from developers who are promoting sites that are within that strategy and in line with that area of search. And so by doing that, we can already eliminate a number of developers who may want to present to us about some wonderful scheme they have, but because it doesn't fit with our strategy, doesn't fit within the area of search that we're looking for sites, we can say to them, well, no, look, there's no point in you presenting because it's not within the scope of what we're looking for. So we will already hopefully have drilled down and have a clear scope and strategy by then to hear from only the sites that are actually relevant to what members are looking to achieve through the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Thomas, you want to come back in?
Just briefly, Chair, thank you very much to Councillor Howe and Mr. Freeman. I was thinking of George Michael anyway. No, for following through those 2 points. I think it's very important that we do stick with that, and that not just We as strategic planning understand that's the basis of any discussion, but the developers who want to prepare and present a scheme recognise that clearly, and that also importantly, if we're going to have all our members speaking potentially at these meetings, that they do similarly, and there is serious care taken on what is and isn't said in those meetings from the legal perspective. Shirley's nodding. I'm always reassured that Shirley's nodding. She's got that. And on that basis, I'm very happy to support option 5. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got a proposal and a seconder. Councillor Ryan, is it anything further to add to the debate just before we go to
just that I haven't actually had any answers to my questions yet.
Okay. Ed, can you cover the answers to Councillor Ryan's questions, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. So I think the first question was what the approach was with the previous local plan. I mean, fundamentally, that was site-specific meetings, which were primarily with officers, and I think officers tended to hear a presentation and politely nod and thank the developer without making any comment or feedback at all, to be honest. So I don't think that was a very helpful approach either, to be honest. And I don't think that necessarily meets the current membership's aspirations for openness and transparency. So that's partly why I bring this report to suggest an alternative approach. In terms of the existing sites that are in the process from GESP, yes, I mean, those sites are still in the process and being handled through the HELAR process. So we'll be in communication with those site promoters as those progress through the process. Fundamentally, we did an additional call for sites as a top-up, if you like, for the call for sites that was done through GESP. So all of those large strategic sites are still in the process. We've also had a number of additional submissions that we're also considering alongside those.
And the neighbourhood plan ones. So there are sites coming through neighbourhood plans as well.
If they've been put forward in our call for sites, then we'll be considering those through the process and communicating with them. I have no way of knowing if all of the sites that are being considered through neighbourhood plans have come through our call for sites process, but any that have.
No, they weren't, not necessarily through ours, are they? They might have come through the neighbourhood plans call for sites.
Yes, so they won't be captured in our process. They'll be going through an assessment through the neighbourhood plan process for the relevant neighbourhood plan.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ed. Mrs. Shaw, can you take us to a vote, please?
Yes, Chair. Members, there's 2 elements now. That the committee consider the proposed options for engaging with developers and site promoters on production of the local plan and agree to pursue option 5 as detailed in the report. Secondly, that the committee's preferred approach to should option 5 be the committee's preferred approach to engagement, the committee are asked to agree that a special meeting of the committee be held in November to hear presentations from those developers and promoters who wish to present their site to members. The detailed arrangements for the meeting to be delegated to Service Lead Planning Strategy and Development Management in consultation with the portfolio holder Strategic Planning. Members, if you're in support of the motion, press your green tick. Against the motion, press your red cross. And if you raise your electronic hand, it would indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
So for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. And Chair, I have 10 votes for, no votes against and no abstentions. So that is carried. Thank you, Chair. Many
thanks. Agenda item 11 is call for evidence, permitted development rights. And Ed Freeman, over to you for a report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is responding to a call for evidence that's come from government about the permitted development rights that they have introduced in recent years. So the Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee has launched a new inquiry to examine the impact and approach, the impact of the government's approach to permitted development rights in recent years, in which they've introduced a whole range of new development rights, which range from allowing offices to change to residential uses, to various barn conversions, to dwellings, to shops to hotels and various other permitted development rights that have come in recent years, all generally subject to a sort of prior approval process for a range of issues to be considered, but not the principal generally. And so we thought as officers that it would be important for us to respond and give some evidence back to this inquiry, given that no doubt all members will be aware of the impact that some of these changes to permitted development rights have had in terms of some of the developments that have arisen across the district, which a number of which are not really in accordance with our own policies and have only come through because of the permitted development rights that have been introduced, but also the knock-on impact of that in terms of establishing a fallback position that developers have then used to exploit to then get planning permission for something that's sort of one step beyond the permitted development rights, as it were. So the call for evidence lists a number of questions that they're asking for evidence for. Those are listed in paragraph 1.3 of the report on page 174 of the agenda. And then we've sort of taken each of those questions and given a brief response to each of those questions to help to inform the committee. Generally, these are quite negative, shall we say, about the permitted development rights. I think generally the government has felt that they were streamlining the planning process, removing red tape, and enabling developments a quicker and easier route through the system, shall we say. I think our experience has been that the result is that they've created a very complicated and difficult to understand system that the public find very hard to engage with and understand, and that it has led to a number of undesirable outcomes in terms of unsustainable developments in inappropriate locations by virtue of the permitted development rights that we wouldn't otherwise have endorsed and granted. And some of our communities are seeing some quite undesirable impacts as a result of those. So we've sought to summarise our concerns in the paper and welcome members' views on the comments we've made before they are hopefully agreed via the committee and then submitted for consideration by the panel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Young, you wish to speak first?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think Ed will confirm that I hate PDQs. I hate a lot of these developments that are going on in the countryside with what are falling down sheds to be converted into houses, or stupid looking chicken sheds to be converted into houses. They are ridiculous, and the sooner we get rid of this, some of these permitted developments, the better it's going to be. And I agree with all the suggestions in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. Does any other non-committee member wish to speak at this time? No, so it's Councillor Ryan up first.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to echo what Councillor Young has just said, really, but even more so, because what we're seeing out in the countryside here is not so much, I think, probably what the spirit of the PDQ laws envisaged, which was the conversion of Victorian and derelict buildings into quite charming dwellings, you know, when they're really no longer fit for modern agriculture. But actually what we're seeing now is barns being erected in the middle of fields, and 3 years later, planning permission sought, not even planning permission because you don't even need it, but the necessary permission sought to turn them into a house in the middle of the countryside. So all you need to do is add 2 or 3 years to your process, and you can end up with a massive house in the middle of the open countryside, far away from any kind of transport links or sustainability, by using a sort of a trapdoor essentially in the planning process. I mean, that's the kind of thing that really needs careful consideration, because we're ending up with developments out in the countryside that actually are in desperately unsustainable locations. It just seems like if you have enough money to buy a site and then sit on it for 3 years, then you can actually build yourself a very nice fancy house in the open countryside. And I do not think that is meeting any of our targets for delivering housing that people need, local people need. I think it offers an unfair advantage to a certain demographic, let's put it that way. And what I've routinely been doing when I'm asked to comment on a PDQ recently is essentially saying that if the building is modern, then it cannot be that redundant. I mean, if it's a Victorian milking parlour, which clearly is not up to modern standards, then I've got no problem with it. But if it's a Dutch barn that could just as easily be dismantled if it's no longer needed, then I do have some grave reservations about that kind of development. I mean, that's all I wanted to contribute from the back end of East Devon, really. That's what's happening out here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thomas, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. Firstly, just to confirm that PDQs are actually PDRs, and not a pretty damn quick answer to give to that one. I'm hoping that's because I don't think we wouldn't want to confuse anybody who's listening into the meeting with that's not actually the case. Secondly, is relates to me is permitted development rights are a way of reducing administration in the planning system. And where they're used for relatively minor items, or there are a whole number of paragraphs in the appropriate act, as I think everybody will know, most of which are pretty trivial, arguing whether somebody can put a CCTV camera up on something or whether they can't, or whether they can put down hard space or whether they can't, without specific planning permission. So I think permitted development rights actually have an enormous role in terms of removing the trivial planning application from the system. And I think we should reflect that there's a good reason for using them. My other question actually relates to a complete omission from our response here. And that's Article 4 directives, which, as members will know, are ways of removing permitted development rights from specific geographical areas rather than anything else. Now, we don't actually mention that in here. Now, for me, I would question, I'm not actually sure how extensively we use Article 4 directives across East Devon, how big the geographical areas that are typically they're applied to are. I mean, are we talking about whole of AOMBs, for example, or are we talking about streets or individual premises? I'd really just appreciate some clarification on Article 4 considerations from Mr. Freeman and his comments as to why we haven't included them at all as a weapon in the armoury.
Seems like a great time to bring you in, Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to clarify, PDQs are a type of permitted development right. I think Councillor Ryan is referring to the terminology we use in our application numbers. So the suffix includes the letters PDQ to refer to permitted development rights under Class Q of the legislation. They are specifically changes of use of former agricultural buildings to dwellings. So it's a type of permitted development right. The report relates to the whole range of permitted development rights, which have a whole range of letters relating to them through to PDS and PDRs and all sorts. In terms of Article 4 directions, no, we don't have very many. It's not a very well used weapon in our armoury, as it were, in East Devon. They are not easy things to do fundamentally, and Article 4 directions have to be agreed by the Secretary of State. There's a whole process whereby they have to be publicised and advertised. And if I recall, if you do an Article 4 direction, you then have to pay compensation for a period of time after it's been adopted to those that then find that they require planning permission for something that previously didn't. So while the governments are quite keen, in my opinion, to refer to Article 4 directions as a way around all of this, they're not an easy tool to use and have significant cost implications, which means that they're not widely used. Their most wide application is generally through the designation of conservation areas, where Article 4 directions are often used to restrict permitted development rights in conservation areas when they're designated. It's probably the most common application of them. But no, not a well-used tool, but for good reason, because they're not an easy thing to use and quite expensive to do.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Thomas, you happy with that?
Euphoric, Chair. Thank you.
Fantastic. Councillor Moulding, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do tend to agree with the observations that have been made on PDRs by Ed and his officers. However, I do get sometimes rather frustrated that we can't be more positive about barn conversions to enable redundant buildings to be brought back into use more readily and provide a home for a young person. But I'm almost certain that there should be ways within our local plan, when we're getting further forward with the production of the local plan, that we can look carefully at how we respond to applications for rural redundant buildings and to bring them back into use. But I don't think the PDR, as recommended by the government, is perhaps the way to do it. Thank you.
Many thanks, Councillor Moulding. So at this point, if we've got no other questions, I'm happy to propose it from the chair that we agree the contents of the report. If there's no other suggestions, Councillor Howe?
Sorry,
No.
press the wrong button.
No problem at all. Mrs. Shaw, can you take us to a vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, one recommendation that the committee agree the contents of the report and that the report forms the basis of the response to government on the call for evidence inquiry. Please press your green tick if you're in support of that motion, press your red cross if you're against that motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
And for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. And Chair, I have 10 votes in support, no votes against and no abstentions, so that is carried. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So agenda item 12 is the Cliffs Valley Regional Park Master Plan. And I know Councillor Young's probably going to want to speak on this, but first it's over to Ed Freeman for his report.
Thank you, Chairman. So members will recall agreeing a draft of the Cliffs Valley Regional Park Master Plan for public consultation at their meeting of the 20th of October last year. So this went out to consultation and ran for 10 weeks from the 5th of November through to the 18th of January. During that time, we received 241 responses. The responses have all now been analysed and are summarised in the appendices to the report alongside officer comments on each of them with a recommendation to how we address those comments, which has then been incorporated into a final version of the document, which is also appended. The majority of the comments are supportive of the work, with the main concerns coming from a range of landowners and developers who are concerned about proposals that affect the boundary of the Cliffs Valley Regional Park. They raise concerns about indicative proposals for future expansions of the park and linked GI projects which would improve access to and wildlife corridors linked to the park. Their main concern seems to be around including projects that are outside of the policy boundary and suggestions that the policy boundary might be amended or changed in future. I think our comments in the appendices note that the boundary to the Cliffs Valley Regional Park can and will only be changed through the local plan. It's a policy in the existing local plan and needs to be reviewed through the local plan process to make those changes. I think the intention through the master plan was to highlight various options for its future expansion and also to have a number of projects that help in terms of links between the Cliffs Valley Regional Park and the surrounding area. I think it's detailed in the appendix that a number of amendments have been made to the document to clarify the status of those projects that are outside of the regional park boundary, and the recommendation here that the master plan will only be used to guide decision making on applications that do lie within the boundary, with the remaining projects and issues highlighted in the reports simply there for guidance purposes. So hopefully those changes have helped to address the majority of the concerns that have come forward that didn't support the plan. And so members are asked now in the recommendation to approve the Cliffs Valley Regional Park Master Plan as a guidance document to inform the future delivery of the regional park and to support decision making on planning applications within the policy boundary of the regional park. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed. I also know that we've got Simon Bates in the meeting. Welcome to the meeting, Simon. If at any point you have anything you wish to say, just chip on in.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So moving outside of committee first, does any non-committee member have anything they wish to say? Councillor Young, over to you.
You guessed it, Chair. Yes, I do want to speak on this. It's been interesting that the meeting today has been all about the local plan and the importance of climate change together with building more buildings. We need to protect and enhance the countryside, which is important for the climate change. This is one of the main drivers for the Cliffs Valley Regional Park. It's my belief that at the same time that we build a better place for our kids and their kids, we do not destroy the very reason we love this beautiful place. I would support going forward with the new local plan to recommend that we do expand the Cliffs Valley Regional Park in the areas that we have already identified. I would also like to thank all the team who have put this plan together, specifically Naomi Harnett and Simon Bates for the work and dedication that they have put in for this important project to become a reality. So I do hope a lot of the work on biodiversity and nature that we have done on this plan would go forward to work in the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. Does any other non-committee member wish to speak at this time? If not, we'll go to Councillor Mike Carroll.
Thank you very much. And to follow up Councillor Young's recommendation, I'll fully support what he says. It's one of those strange ones because Mr. Freeman's nice introduction said this relates to the current existing local plan. And it does. He's dead right. Wouldn't doubt him at all. But of course, we are producing something. We have produced something for the current local plan, just as the current local plan is just about to die and we're just about to reinvent it. So Councillor Young's statement off the stop is this should be the starting point for our local plan, not the end, or our future local plan, not the end of our last one. And I also agree, yeah, if we're serious about wildlife, if we're serious about the environment, we can't keep these policy boundaries cutting across wildlife habitats and everything else. And that is what this latest document does. It gives those wildlife habitats that breathing space to allow them to continue, not be cut off by industry, roads, all the other stuff that basically puts our wildlife in further jeopardy than it already is in. So I wholeheartedly recommend this and recommend this as a starting point for our local plan. And I have to point out some issues, some warnings, I suppose, Mr. Freeman and his team. One of the GESP proposals was to expand the science park across the A30 into Sowton Village. That is wholly within this plan. And in fact, one of the statements, and it fully sums up Sowton Village, is on page 208 or 26. Got 2 page numbers, 208 of the report, I suppose is the best way to put it. The intimate and historic, surprisingly tranquil Sowton Village, which sits in the valley and has an otherworldly feel. And that sums Sowton Village up, which is a conservation area, down to a T. You put a science park alongside that, on its entrance and everything else, and you could harm it severely. We need to be really clever and careful with what we're doing. And we really need this, as what everyone else has said earlier in today about putting the environment at the forefront. This is it. This is the sharp point. If you ignore this, then you are really not doing what we said we were going to do right at the beginning. So I wholeheartedly make that recommendation and ask that this be taken as the starting point for our new local plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howe. Can I get a seconder for that, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chair, if you're agreeable.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnott. Does anyone else wish to speak on the item? Councillor Arnott, over to you.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I know you thought you'd escape then. Very quickly, I just want to thank everybody who's presented this. So starting with the two councillors most involved, Councillor Young and obviously Councillor Howe as well, very much on his patch, and all of the officers. This report is an extremely good read, and you know, over the other end of the district, we've got report envy. I only hope that when we look at the Axe Valley area as we're moving ahead, that something as brilliant as this is brought forward. I'm particularly interested in 2 points. First of all, the really intelligent emphasis on the history and the cultural aspects of this, and good luck over there in promoting that. I hope that becomes very, you know, an important part too. And let's try and bring that forward. Have a chat with Nick Hookway, get him interested in that too. That history is amazing, and the forts and stuff. I haven't got a clue before I read this, to be honest. I think, as Councillor Howe has said, this is an exemplar of what we must do for the environment. And I think, I'm glad he said this, and I'm genuinely not scoring points here. I remember having a conversation with him at one of these weird guest sessions that was like the Moonies about 18 months, 2 years ago, about the problem if you delegate too much decision making about these major strategic issues up a tier and we lose control of it. And I'm really glad we've got control back, because we're now doing this for ourselves. So absolutely delighted to second it, Chair. Sorry to speak. I know you'd rather have gone straight to a vote, but I just wanted to say that because I think it's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Ed or Simon, do you have anything you wish to say just before we take it to a vote?
I just like, sorry, Ed, yeah.
No, you go first, Simon.
Well, I'd just like to thank you very much for the support. It means a lot. It has been quite an undertaking, taken up an awful lot of my time, but it's really gratifying to see that there's so much support from the public as well for things as innovative as a community incorporated organisation, a trust, for example, that might deliver more in the regional park. Through being able to pull in grants and money that wouldn't otherwise be available to a local authority. So that's obviously for debate going forward, but thanks for your support.
Thank you for all your work. Ed, do you have anything you wish to add?
Chairman, I just wanted to pick up on the point that I think was made about this being the starting point for the local plan. I mean, I think it's important to say that obviously we need to look at the boundaries of the Cliffs Valley Regional Park holistically through the local plan process. And it's important that we go through that process and that this work didn't preempt that. So I agree, this is obviously an important piece of work and great piece of work from Simon and the team to take this forward. But I just urge reservations in terms of seeing it as a starting point for the local plan. It's a key element of the local plan, but we shouldn't preempt decisions that may be made in the future about the boundaries of the Cliffs Valley Regional Park and the relationship with other issues that will come through the local plan process. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chamberlain, you can have the last word of the meeting.
No, thank you very much, Chair. So nice of you. For me, I've had quite a few residents in our area over here in Broadcliff because the Cliffs Valley Trail is obviously so important to us. Like I was saying earlier, the infrastructure that's needed around here is huge. With the amount of development that's coming into our area, and people keep saying to me, when is this likely to happen? And I keep saying to them, it's sort of in the plan going forward. Do you have any timescales that we can sort of say to people, well, we're hoping to get a link between Cranbrook, Broadcliff Station and Exeter in this sort of time frame, or are we still very much sort of, and the link from like Cranbrook through to Broadcliff Village, if you like, as well, which we haven't got any infrastructure, no paths, no nothing at the moment. So do we have any timescales on those where we're thinking this might be able to be implemented with all the developments going on, or it's just a question I had to ask?
And does that something you could answer?
I'm going to back that one to Simon. I think as the delivery officer for Cliffs Valley Regional Park, I think he's much better placed to answer that.
Yeah,
I know obviously Simon is all tied up with landowners and things. I just wondered in this area how it's sort of going forward. Is it we hopeful with some links?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would love to go faster. I have to say the County Council are being very, very supportive in terms of putting staff from the engineering design group alongside me to help me deliver this. In terms of the Cliffs Valley Trail, I can say that we will be coming back to you with a revised delivery plan this summer. It's a long time ago, but you asked me to look at a completely off-road trail, and that's what we're doing at the moment. So that will come back. And in terms of delivery, then I see the section along Moss Hain Lane, which is linking West Clist with Clist Honiton, as the first bit that could come forward, because we've got only a few landowners who are generally supportive. Cost would be in the region of £2 million, and it would link people in the new homes at West Clist and Pinnow with the jobs at Science Park and Sky Park. So we want to progress that one within the next year. And yeah.
Thanks very much, Simon. Appreciate that.
Chair, can I just see if Simon had any visions for linking these development on this side that we've got masses of, i.e. Cranbrook towards Exeter? Do we have any timescales on that? Thank you.
Yeah, the County Council that are working on a new link between Cranbrook and Exeter, pretty well alongside the railway line. They're looking to put planning applications in this summer for that. So that is coming forward this year, certainly in terms of planning. The other routes that you mentioned, Sarah, the routes from Cranbrook to Broadcliff, well, again, you know, I'm really keen to progress those. I know that there are calls for a bridge crossing of the railway. But there are things that we can do now in terms of the quiet lane of Elbury Lane, linking the schools at Cranbrook with Clist Vale. And I'd love to progress that, but again, it's just resource really. But one thing I will say finally is that another piece of work we want to do to this year is put a major funding bid into the lottery, a circa £5 million bid. And hopefully that can buy us some of the resources that we need to progress some of these trails.
Fantastic.
That's fantastic, thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Go on then, Mike. You can have the last word.
Well, it's not about the last word. It's just about a balancing act after Councillor Chamberlain did her upper part. I thought I'd better give Simon a chance to elaborate on the down parts. The leading to the Cliffs Valley Trail and the connection for all this, you know, further to Topsham, etc. So, you know, it would be nice just to have that same elaboration for the second half of the trail, shall we say.
Go ahead, Simon.
Thank you. Yeah, that's as Mike knows, it's more difficult. We have been looking at a route west of the A376. It involves a lot of landowners. And the conversation is still ongoing, but and therefore I think, well, we'll bring a delivery plan back to you this summer, and it will look at the two options there, a west of the A376 and an east of the A376 option, and it will ask you to choose which one you would like to progress.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Shaw, over to you for summing up and taking us to a vote, please.
So the final motion for item 12, and that's a single motion, that members approve the Cliffs Valley Regional Park Master Plan as a guidance document to inform the future delivery of the regional park and to support decision making on planning applications within the policy boundary of the regional park. Members, please press your green tick if you're in support of that motion, press your red cross if you're against that motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
And for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. And Chair, I have 10 votes in support, no votes against, and no abstentions. So that is carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, that brings our meeting to an end. So I'd like to thank everyone, including any of the members of the public watching online, for taking part. Can I remind all those present that your comments will be live to the public until it's been confirmed that the meeting is no longer live. And thank you to all the officers for the work today.
Thank you, Chair.